The first time Peter's hand brushed against mine, I froze. Not because I was shocked, far from it. But because it felt like fire and ice at the same time. It jolted me so electric, it stuttered me into silence. I looked up, expecting to see guilt, shame, or maybe even a smack on his face. But there was nothing, just his usual calm expression, like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. It was during one of those late-night brainstorming sessions in the family's Legos penthouse. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and the faint hum of Afrobeat music from a neighbor's party filtered through the windows. We were going over designs for a collaborative shoot, a rare merger of his daring photography with my classic, elegant designs. The collection was meant to redefine luxury in African fashion. But sitting that close to him, with his camera lens still slung around his neck and his steady, confident gaze dissecting my sketches, I couldn't ignore how different he was from the man I married, Jameson. My husband, Jameson, was everything a man should be on paper: wealthy, powerful, and respected. Together, we were a power couple, the textile tycoon and the fashion mogul, the kind of pairing that greased magazine covers and made headlines. But somewhere along the line, Jameson and I became more business partners than lovers. Love was no longer a thread in our marriage, it was just a fabric we sold. Peter, on the other hand, was chaos wrapped in charisma. He saw the world differently, through angles and shadows, capturing beauty in the most unexpected places. He was young, yes, 15 years younger than me, but he had this old soul, this confidence that made you forget how much he'd seen for someone his age. That night, as I explained why I felt a particular fabric wouldn't flow well under the studio lights, he leaned closer, too close. His cologne, warm and spicy, filled the space between us. "You're too cautious, Ba," he said, his voice low but firm. "Fashion is meant to challenge, not just please." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words didn't come, not because he was wrong, but because I felt myself leaning into his closeness, into this dangerous, invisible line we were flirting with. And then he did it. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that felt like a dare. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen glances, lingering touches, and conversations that lasted longer than they should. Each moment felt like unraveling a tightly woven fabric, thread by forbidden thread. There was no way this could end well if anyone found out. If they found out, the empire we built together would crumble, and the shame would be unbearable. But no matter how hard I tried to tell myself to stop, to pull away, I couldn't, because with Peter, it wasn't just about attraction. It was about feeling alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Now, as I stood in the dimly lit studio, watching him adjust the lighting for our final test shoot, I knew we were at a point of no return. But how do you stop something that feels so inevitable, so intoxicating? This wasn't just a story of infidelity, it was a battle between duty and desire, a clash of loyalty and love, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The question wasn't whether the secret would come out, it always does. The question was how much damage it would do when it did. The studio felt unusually quiet that evening, except for the soft hum of Peter's camera as he prepared for the shoot. The weight of our secret hung in the air, thicker than the scent of fresh fabric swatches spread across the room. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the way his fingers lingered on mine when he handed me a sketch earlier, to the way his eyes seemed to see through me, peeling back layers I'd spent years building. "Let's start with the ivory silk," I said, forcing a steadiness into my voice. Peter didn't respond immediately, instead standing there, studying me like I was one of the models he often captured on film. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "Are you okay?" That question, so simple, yet it carried more weight than I could handle at that moment. "I'm fine," I said, turning away quickly and pretending to busy myself with the rack of gowns. My fingers trembled as I adjusted a hanger, and I prayed he wouldn't know. But Peter wasn't the type to let things slide. He walked over, closing the gap between us until I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He reached out, gently turning me to face him. "Bola, you're not fine," he said, his tone soft but firm. "You've been different, distracted." I wanted to deny it, to brush him off with a casual laugh and some excuse about work stress. But the truth was, I was distracted, and the distraction was standing right in front of me, too close, too tempting. "I'm just tired," I managed to say, though my voice betrayed me, shaky and unconvincing. He tilted his head, his dark eyes searching mine. "It's more than that." Before I could respond, the door to the studio creaked open, and my heart nearly stopped. Jameson's voice echoed through the room. "Bah, are you here?" Peter and I instinctively stepped apart, the distance between us now feeling like an unspoken agreement to bury whatever had just passed between us. "Yes, I'm here," I called out, my voice louder than necessary. Jameson walked in, his presence commanding as always, dressed in one of his signature tailored suits. He carried a thick folder under his arm, his face calm but unreadable. "I didn't know you were still working," he said, glancing at Peter briefly before turning his attention back to me. "It's the final shoot preparations," I replied, forcing a smile. "You know how important this collection is." He nodded, setting the folder on a nearby table. "I understand, but don't overwork yourself. You've barely had time for yourself lately." The irony of his words stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I nodded, murmuring something about wrapping up soon. Jameson turned to Peter, his expression neutral. "I trust everything's on track with the photography." "Of course," Peter replied smoothly, his tone professional and confident. As they exchanged a few more words, I stood there, torn between relief and guilt, relief that nothing seemed out of the ordinary to Jameson, and guilt because I knew this moment, this delicate balance, couldn't last forever. When Jameson finally left, the tension in the room was palpable. Peter looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Does he ever suspect?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I walked over to the rack of gowns, pretending to busy myself once again. But the truth loomed over us, undeniable and dangerous. We were playing a game we couldn't win, and deep down, we both knew it. And yet, even as the weight of what we were risking pressed down on me, I felt a pull toward Peter growing stronger, like a thread unraveling from a tightly woven fabric. I was coming undone, and there was no way to stop it, not yet. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between two worlds that could never coexist. Jameson was busier than ever, caught up in negotiations for a new factory expansion. His absence, both physical and emotional, gave Peter and me more opportunities to steal moments we shouldn't. Each glance, each touch, each whispered word in the quiet corners of the studio felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff. It wasn't long before we stopped pretending we could control it. One night, after the final shoot wrapped, Peter invited me to his private gallery. It was a space I'd never been to, one he rarely shared with anyone. The walls were lined with oversized prints of his work, moody, candid shots of mid-laughter streets in Lagos, sunsets so vivid they looked like paintings. But in the center of the room was a single photograph that took my breath away. It was me, a candid shot he'd taken during one of our sessions, my head tilted slightly as I examined the fabric, the lighting, the angle. It captured me in a way I'd never seen myself before. "It's beautiful," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You're beautiful," he replied, stepping closer. For a moment, I let myself believe it, believe that this reckless, forbidden connection was worth it, that it was okay to choose passion over propriety, desire over duty. But then, like a sharp needle piercing through a delicate fabric, reality struck. I imagined Jameson finding out, the headlines, the gossip, the looks of betrayal and disappointment from everyone who trusted me, my staff, my friends, my family. I imagined the empire we built crumbling, not because of a failed business deal, but because of me. "Peter," I said, my voice trembling. "This has to stop." His brows furrowed, confusion and hurt flashing across his face. "What are you I'm saying we can't do this anymore," I replied, stepping back. "This, whatever it is between us, it's wrong. It's selfish." "You don't mean that," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. But I did. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of my actions fully sinking in. It wasn't just about me or Peter, it was about everyone who would be affected by our choices. I care about you, I said, tears welling in my eyes. But I can't destroy everything I've built, everything Jameson and I have built, for something that can't last. Peter didn't argue. He just stood there, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his eyes glistening with emotions he didn't voice. I turned and walked out of the gallery, my heart heavy but resolute. That night, as I lay in bed beside Jameson, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I thought about the woman I wanted to be, the woman I owed it to myself to be. To the women reading this, let me tell you something, life will test you. It will present you with temptations that seem too sweet, too perfect to resist. But in those moments, remember who you are. Remember the values you stand for, the people who trust you, and the legacy you want to leave behind. Passion fades, but consequences linger. Don't trade the fabric of your life for a single loose thread. Choose wisely, choose strength, choose yourself.